As bakers, we constantly strive to make the perfect bread. There are many factors that influence the final quality of a sourdough loaf. These include the quantity and characteristics of the raw ingredients, the ambient temperature of the space in which you make the dough, the length of time that you let the dough rest, the mechanical processes you subject the dough to, and so on and so forth. We find ourselves obsessing over these things, making small tweaks to our methods to see what impact they have on the final product. Here, at BreadHad HQ, we're also obsessed with trying to make the process of making sourdoughs simple. We're all busy people, and so we want to make the best bread we can with as little effort as possible. So where there might be an opportunity to shorten the process, we will want to test it to see what impact it has on the bread quality. This BreadHad Lab video investigates one of these processes called autolysis, known in the sourdough world as the Autolyse process. In biology, autolysis, more commonly known as self-digestion, refers to the destruction of a cell through the action of its own enzymes. In relation to sourdough, autolyse is the term used to describe a period of rest, commonly 1 to several hours, following the initial mixing of flour and water before other ingredients such as salt and yeast are added to the dough. This rest period hydrates the flour, which activates two enzymes: the protease enzyme, which starts to break down the proteins in the flour and helps the dough become more stretchy and extensible, and the amylase enzyme, which turns the flour starches into sugar, making them more readily available to yeast. Many bakers argue that an autolyse will help make the dough easier to work and will lead to bread that is taller, tastier, and with a more open crumb structure. In our normal bread method, for simplicity's sake, we add the leaven and salt at the same time as the flour and water mix, before letting it rest for an hour. This means that fermentation begins during this stage, which is why we refer to it as an active autolyse. Purists argue that the introduction of ingredients other than flour and water during this stage affects the quality of the final loaf. In the remainder of this video, we'll compare the two processes and draw some conclusions at the end. We'll start with loaf A, which will undergo a period of autolyse. We add 400 grams of water to 490 grams of strong white bread flour and 55 grams of wholemeal bread flour, then mix until all of the dry ingredients are incorporated. We then covered and left it to autolyse for 4 hours at 21 degrees centigrade. 4 hours later, and the autolyse process is complete. You'll notice that the surface of the dough is smooth and shiny. When we stretch the dough between our fingers, it easily forms a nice thin membrane, and you can see the light shining through. This is called the window pane effect, which demonstrates that the flours are fully hydrated and gluten has started to develop. The next thing we do to loaf A is to add 110 grams of active leaven and 10 grams of fine sea salt and combine. Mixing leaven and salt into an autolyse dough can be a bit fiddly. For loaf B, we'll follow our standard active autolyse method, which means we combine all of the ingredients at the same time, mix and leave to rest for an hour. Simple. We now cover both loaves with a damp tea towel and leave for an hour to rest. 1 hour later, and we can have a look at what's happened to both doughs. Loaf B, on the right, the non-autolyse dough, has started to develop some elasticity and strength. Loaf A, the autolyse dough on the left, is smoother and slightly more elastic than the other one. From this stage onwards, we will follow the same method for both loaves, which involves undertaking 3 sets of stretch and folds with a 30-minute rest in between each. Let's speed things up a little, shall we? At this stage, to check the gluten development in the dough, we perform a window pane test. Both are fine, so it's time to bulk rest the doughs in plastic containers. At 21 degrees centigrade, it took about 5 hours for the dough to expand by 25%, which is exactly what we were looking for. So let's have a look, shall we? Sourdough A, the Autolyse dough, looks pretty active. Look at those lovely bubbles of trapped carbon dioxide. There are fewer trapped gas bubbles in the non-Autolyse dough B, but other than that, both doughs look very similar, smooth, flexible, and ready for the next stage, the pre-shape. There was absolutely no notable difference between the two doughs during the pre-shaping process. The doughs were then bench rested for 20 minutes, shaped, placed in bannetons and left to retard in the fridge overnight. The next day, the loaves were scored and baked in exactly the same way. Let's have a look at the results, shall we? First of all, both loaves look fabulous. Looking more closely, the crusts of both loaves are identical. Both scores opened up nicely and both show a good oven spring. Let's cut the loaves and see what they look like inside. Loaf A, the Autolyse loaf, has a nice open crumb. The holes are not too big and not too small, exactly as we like it. It is soft with a nice crispy crust. Loaf B, the non-Autolyse loaf, also looks great, soft with an excellent crumb. When we compare both loaves side by side, you can clearly see the difference in size. The non-Autolyse loaf is wider and slightly higher. Interestingly, you can also see that the crumb of the non-Autolyse bread on the right is more open than the Autolyse loaf. This could be because the Autolyse bread developed more strength from extra gluten development, which inhibited dough expansion. Finally, there was no notable taste difference between either loaf. They both tasted delicious. So there you have it. Both loaves are good, but there are some subtle differences between them. If I had to choose, I'd go for the non or active Autolyse loaf, which had slightly better oven spring and a more open crumb, and, crucially, is much easier to make. This experiment proved that there is no real advantage to adding an Autolyse to the sourdough making process when making this type of bread. Thanks for watching, and please do feel free to leave comments below. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. See you again soon.